Welcome everyone to the live question and answer with the Honourable Senator David Shoebridge. On behalf of PakOZ and our team, welcome David to the program. Just a little bit about PakOZ for yourself, David, and the viewers watching. PakOZ originally was a web portal that was started back in 2003. I'll switch off my phone, it's beeping. The project was a collective effort by Pakistani students in Australia aimed at connecting permanent residents, temporary residents, students, and everyone alike. And we found as we grew, we connected with the Australian community as well. So the platform now brings together businesses, institutions, organizations, Pakistani entrepreneurs, media people, bring everyone together. And it's designed to link the Pakistani community living here in Australia. David, just we're here to talk about the situation in Pakistan and its neighbours, but it's a bit hard to avoid the conversation of human rights or political persecution or crackdown on journalists and even YouTubers in Pakistan. Now, you've heard a lot. You've had a lot of written information sent to you by numerous press media across the world, human rights organisations. We live in a new era where things have seemed to have gone live.
Yeah, look, I've got to tell you, first of all, it's lovely to be here on PakOZ, and I really admire the work you do and that kind of connecting with the Pakistan-Australia community and making those connections with, myself and others who are very, very lucky to work alongside you. But like literally, if you just cast your mind back over the last 2 years, say, think about how many images and messages we've got just out of Pakistan into Australia. And if you're willing to look, if you're willing to actually turn your mind to it with what I would hope is just a frank, honest and inquiry mind, you can get this kind of almost real-time understanding about the political situation in Pakistan. And there've been, this appalling series of attacks on basic democratic rights in Pakistan, whether it's the deregistering of, political oppositions, the jailing of political leaders, the intimidation of candidates. We literally followed that in real time, and that would not have been possible 10 years ago. So yes, it gives you this real-time understanding of what's happened. I think what's been missing though, and I've felt very frustrated by it, we've had for those who are willing to look, you have a real-time understanding, but we haven't had that real-time whole of government political response to it, right? Whether it's in Australia or the United States, India or around the world. And I think, that's been, I've felt that a particular challenge in trying to sort of come to terms with what we're seeing. The mismatch between what we're seeing and government action is real.
Sure. That's quite common, but it's much harder to hide. I mean, decades ago, we'd get the news filtering through, underground channels and whatnot. But we live in a new world where things can't be hidden anymore. And the thing that is worrying, and it's a global phenomenon, it's a sort of the political or the dictatorial. Well, so what? What are you going to do now?
Yeah, and it's that culture of impunity that I think we need to absolutely push back against, because we can witness in real time brutal police crackdowns. I mean, there's one image that I still can't get out of my mind. It's in the last 6 months in Pakistan of a police officer pushing a protester off the top of a stacked container crate. What was the protest? The protest was a pro-democracy protest, someone wanting their voice to be heard. And I still, literally can't get it out of my mind when I think about that. And it's the challenge we face, and I think we should be frank about it, is how do we break down that culture of impunity? I think it can be done. For the first time ever, we've got sort of real-time accountability about what's happening on the ground. What I think we need to think about globally is how do we translate that to real-time accountability when governments are abusing people's human rights? How do we get international solidarity to work to hold people to account? And, whether those rights abuses are happening in Pakistan or Australia. And I think, that's the political challenge I think we should all sign up to meeting.
Absolutely. And I can't, none of us can get the image out of our heads of that man that was pushed off the container. And he was actually praying. I can't imagine someone doing that to a rabbi or a Jew who's reading the Torah, or a Christian kneeling in prayer, or a Muslim who was in prayer. I mean, it's something we've never seen before, especially within Pakistan. And he was symbolic of what a peaceful protest should look like. He wasn't doing anything.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think probably that's why it's really, stuck in my mind and many other people's minds. It was an act of faith-based peaceful protest and met with extreme state-sanctioned cruelty. And, that should, you think, spark a kind of global pushback and, some kind of stark response from governments around the world to say, actually, this is not on. But look, I think I know that, at different times you can give up hope in politics. If politics doesn't fix this, then what is politics for? But I've got to tell you, decision makers, those in positions of power, desperately try and shut this down. That at different times you see efforts to have an internet blackout for parts of Pakistan, and we see it play out in places like Kashmir and at different times in Palestine. It's authoritarian governments, anti-democratic governments don't want this information out there. They don't want this information out there because they know that it undermines their support. They know that it undermines their legitimacy, and they know that it builds a case for change. And, the more that they resist, the more we should be insisting on getting that information out. Because if they understand it undermines their support, and it builds a case for change, we should understand that too. And I believe it does.
Sure. And there's one thing, the internet now, it's a new phenomenon. We're not hearing stories passed down from people that have made their way out, like they made their way out from Vietnam during the Vietnam War. I remember growing up in high school, reading the stories of the refugees and how they made their way through Kampuchea, through the Red Cross. And now with shutting the internet down, it seems like just most recently in Pakistan, there was a crackdown on people who were sharing memes of the governor of Punjab, Mariam Nawaz. I mean, I'm not for memes of disgusting images of females, or people have their fun with everyone, but they were just memes and WhatsApp groups, and they targeted the admins of the WhatsApp group. People's houses were raided. It's like the more they try, the thicker, the deeper the mud they get into. And this is one recent example. But where do we sit now here in Australia? What as Australians, as individuals, and yourselves as politicians, what is our next step?
Well, I mean, we've got our own, federal election, and I suppose that's going to overwhelm a bunch of federal political minds. I'm thankfully not up for election. I'm in the middle of a 6-year Senate term, but I can tell politics is a team sport. I'll be doing everything I can for my colleagues in that federal election. But, putting that'll come and go, this festival of democracy that we have in Australia. I suppose, what should we be expecting from our political leaders? Well, I would expect Australia's political leaders, if we believe in a multicultural Australia, and I can tell you I absolutely do. I feel incredibly blessed to live in, I think, one of the world's great multicultural cities of Sydney. This, incredibly heterogeneous mix of people from across the planet who come together and build this amazing society. I feel blessed to do that. But, we need politicians to actually step up. That means, living in a multicultural, harmonious society like this means actually caring about these global issues. It means
Sure.
caring about people's friends and their families and their relatives. It means being a voice for the voiceless sometimes. And it's not about, walking down a street festival and eating nice food. It's about meeting people where they're at, understanding the concerns that they have, in terms of the Pakistan-Australia community, about the bloody mess that Pakistan's in at the moment, and being a genuine voice. I'd actually, in some ways, it's not that hard. It's just meeting people where they're at,
Sure.
And I just reflect upon it. If, I think about the enormous courage it takes to leave your country and all your connections and travel to the other side of the planet and build a future there. And, it's almost self-selecting group of people who have the courage and the impetus to do that. But then when you're in that country and you're 100% committed to that country, like the Pakistan-Australia diaspora is in Australia, you kind of hope that you get that commitment back from political leaders, that they will take on board your concerns. And I think, my engagement with some of the communities, they feel like that's not being reciprocated across politics. And I think you should expect
it. I go back to what you said about people migrating and what it takes to migrate. My first relative came to Australia in 1899 by boat, and he came here as a labourer. And I found his documents in the Australian National Archives. My grandfather came before World War II. My great-grandfather came before that. And the first relative that came was my great-great-uncle. He died. His name is Qutbuddin. He died in Lismore. So there's generations that go back. We still have links back to Pakistan. But yeah, I can't imagine what people sacrifice to come here, whether they are professionals, whether they are refugees, or all sorts of people. It's a big step coming to Australia, and Australia is a beautiful country. It's I think it's probably the greatest country in the world. I have relatives in other countries, and there's no example of what we have in Australia. It's beautiful. I think the only thing, we don't have the political will sometimes, as other nations do. I think because we've been in this little tiny island far away, and we seem to tag the line of the big boys because we don't want to be in the bad books. But going back to...
We shouldn't. Can I just say, we shouldn't take it for granted, and actually fighting to keep those core principles in play, I think, is more important now than ever. At the end of last year, we saw a particularly nasty little push in federal politics where the Labor Party joined with the coalition to push through 3 pieces of legislation, and they did it with what's called a guillotine. They wouldn't even let it be debated in Parliament. They just literally rammed it through in a few hours. And I saw it, and many informed observers saw it as perhaps one of the biggest potential attacks on multicultural Australia since we got rid of the White Australia policy. It allows for deporting people. It allows for detaining people. It removes the rights of people who are in immigration detention, gives incredible powers to the immigration minister, and they're all ripe for abuse moving forward. So, I absolutely agree with you. We live in a really special place. We live in an incredibly harmonious and positive society. But when you find politics doing things like that, winding the clock back, I think we should all have our radar out, and we should be on the front foot protecting those things we care about in the society.
Yeah, but let me just say, if they're getting so hard line with changes in legislation with migrants, as you said, why can't they take a hard line and prevent people who are dictators or have been part of an establishment, have been persecuting, political leadership like they have in Pakistan, crack down on journalists and abuse of human rights? Why? Like, I'm talking about the military establishment of Pakistan.
Well, I mean, if these are the kind of questions that I think absolutely we should be asking. Like, if we have governments here who are willing to beat their chests and get tough against somebody who, broke a law in Australia, or behave badly in Australia, and therefore they're going to throw the book at them. And, it could be a property offence. It could be an offence against, Centrelink, it could be a more serious offence, but, they're willing to beat their chest and say, law and order matters, and that's why they're going to be tough on migrants. Then how do you explain their relative silence when they're inviting government officials who have been complicit in anti-democratic crackdowns, in false imprisonments, in the abuse of power? And it's not just Pakistan. We could have pointed to their failure to take action against the former regime in Bangladesh. We could have a look at how they failed to take action against decision makers in Sri Lanka. We could point to a recent example where they actually invited somebody from the Fijian military who was deeply implicated in gross human rights abuses in Fiji. They invited that person in to take a senior leadership role in the ADF. So how is it that they can crack down on little people, people with no power, but are absolutely spineless to do something like put in sanctions against decision makers in foreign regimes? I don't understand that. We should, I think, have a global leadership role when it comes to this. We should be, whether these decision makers are in Pakistan or Bangladesh, United Kingdom, Sri Lanka, United States, I don't care. If you've engaged in human rights abuses, you should not be able to come to Australia. If you have assets in Australia, those assets should be frozen. And you shouldn't be able to send your kids here to get an education as though we're open to whoever. We should have some hard and fast rules, and they should be applied across the board.
Of course, you can't say to one group of people, we come in peace, and to another group of people say we shoot to kill. And what's it going to take for that to be enforced? Because I see it seems like an ideal position to be in. It's a great idea, but nothing's happening. Why isn't there any traction going forward?
I think, we have a foreign affairs department in Australia, a bunch of professional bureaucrats who over decades have persuaded the government of the day that it's far more important for Australia to have continuing engagement, to have meetings, to keep our trade relationships on track. Mm. That's far more important than taking a stand over any one particular human rights or democracy issue. Sure. And yet there's this almost like this disease of engagement that has taken hold in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and it overrides basic principles that I think we should be sticking to. And it does not work. We've got the example of China where, for decades we refused to put human rights issues, front and center. We tried to de-link all those issues from trade, and that got us nowhere. We didn't make friends, didn't change policy positions. We see that playing out at the moment, almost like an echo of that playing out in our relationship with India and the BJP administration in India, putting trade ahead of human rights and democracy issues. And then, we see another echo of that in Pakistan, how, you would have thought that our government should be listening to the concerns that are coming from the Pakistan-Australia diaspora and openly challenging the administration and saying, we believe in democracy. We're concerned about what's happening, and to make some kind of public remonstration against it. But instead, we get this sort of, behind the scenes, quiet, almost invisible diplomacy, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's probably never going to work.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that. If we said if the democratic world said, well, do you know what? We're not going to let you travel. If you've engaged in human rights abuses, like this whole chunk of the world is off bounds to you. If you've engaged in, human rights abuses, you can't hide your money in our countries. If you've engaged in human rights abuses, you can't send your kids here. And if Australia says that, if the United States says that, if, our friends in Europe say that, if we can persuade countries across the world to say that, that is ultimately an incredibly powerful tool. I don't pretend it's going to fix everything, but it sure as hell could push the world in the right direction, wouldn't it?
Sure. I mean, sure. That leads me to ask a question. I mean, when you go to, when you come to Australia, Border Force have a list of names to watch out for. And if someone's investing in Australia from, i.e., Pakistan or those places that across the world they've been have a bad record of human rights abuses, why isn't there a list saying, well, hang on, we're going to ban these people from investing in Australia? It just sounds very simple to do.
In fact, you know what? Parliament passed laws to make this happen. They're called the Magnitsky kind of sanctions laws. We passed these laws to have that happen. But of course, we passed a particularly, I think, flawed set of laws that say all of that decision-making about who should have sanctions against them, the scope of the sanctions, all of that sits with the minister behind closed doors, and there's no role for the parliament in actually prescribing people, debating people, and listing people. There's no role for the parliament. And so every time we raise the issue with, you know, whether it's Foreign Minister Wong or senior bureaucrats, we say, well, you know, what are you doing to list this grouping? Why haven't you listed this person? You know, this particular Australian dual citizen was abused. Why aren't you holding their perpetrators to account? They will say, oh, well, we have a policy of not publicly commenting on who we would contemplate sanctioning. And, you know, it does not work. The United States has a process where the Congress can pass resolutions and force the government to issue sanctions against people who abuse human rights. And we should absolutely have those same laws in Australia as well.
Well, yes, the US House of Representatives back in 2024, they wrote a signed letter for the release of Imran Khan. Can Australian politicians do something similar here?
Well, I mean, of course we could. But, you know, I think, again, we see this kind of sort of collective failure to hold the government to account, to insist upon kind of basic principles in our international diplomacy. And what you find often with the Labor Party and the coalition is, you know, they're looking for when they next get in government, and they sure as hell don't want a feisty, independent parliament that's going to actually hold them to account or insist that they take action. When they get into government, if the coalition gets into government the next time, and I'll be frank, I hope they don't, but if they do, they don't want a noisy, independent, feisty parliament holding them to account. They want a nice, quiet time in government, being able to do whatever they want. And, you know, and I don't think that works. I don't think it works in the interests of the Australian public. I definitely don't think it works in the interests of Pakistan-Australia community. And ultimately, it diminishes Australia's role on the global stage.
Okay. What would happen if a senator tomorrow said, look, I've got this letter for the release of Imran Khan and I need people to sign them in?
Well, I mean, there's multiple ways in which, you know, those open letters are drafted. And I think they're most powerful when you can bring people across and get multiple people to sign on. And it's often best when it's generated in the community, and then the community then asks politicians across the board, you know, will they endorse, will they sign on to this? And that's my experience. When these calls come from the community, that's when they can be most powerful. You know, and that's actually how I do my work. You know, I'm the Home Affairs multicultural spokes for the Greens nationally, and our work is really driven by those connections we have with multicultural Australia and different communities. I find that I personally find it really compelling when I'm out amongst the community and you know, and I have, you know, strong, united representations asking for action, and that's, you know, why I particularly prize my relationship with the Pakistan-Australia community. You're a feisty bunch, you know. You like holding your politicians to account, and you like us doing things, and I really appreciate that sort of frank and honest engagement.
Oh, no, it's always. I'll add Adil. He's been on waiting as well. He's one of the panelists as well. So I don't want to hog all the time. I know we only got 6 minutes to go. Adil, if you'd like to take the floor.
Oh, hi, sir. How are you, David? You good?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. My parents still talk about you, just to let you know, and they say remember you in their good thoughts and praise.
All right, that's lovely. That's lovely to hear.
Okay, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for always supporting the good causes, whether it's a Sri Lankan community, Pakistani community, Bangladeshi community, Palestinian community. You have always been there for everyone when it comes to doing the right thing, saying the right thing, and implementing the right measures. My question that has struck from the conversations that you and Naim Bhai have had so far is that how do we go about getting our politicians in power in the government to actually do the similar things like what's been done in the UK by the politicians, what's been done in Canada by the politicians, for example, writing letters to army generals, writing letters to Pakistan government officials and things like that. What would be the best go-to scenario for this avenue?
Well, I actually think the community making those demands, and if you have a common set of demands that you'd like politicians to sign on, that everyone's feeling kind of vulnerable at the moment because we've got this thing called a federal election happening. So now is a really good time to say, look, actually, this is important to us. It's going to be important to how we vote, and we'd like you to tell us before the election is called where you stand on these positions, and use a federal election to hold politicians to account. I mean, I would really urge you to use the next 2 months to do that. Because, it's surprising how much more receptive they are in a few months leading up to an election than they are just after they get elected, when, you might find it harder to get them return your call or answer your demand. So, I would organise in the community.
In the past 20 years since I have arrived in Australia and made myself Australian as a skilled migrant, having voted different ways, different people, different parties, I have seen lots of differences before and after election promises. Many promises have not had been fulfilled. So there is another hype that being from Pakistan, which is now considered, unfortunately, a third world country and a Muslim world as well, how much support we can actually get, and how do we? I understand that we should take our community and write letters and put our voice out there with our votes. Yes, with our vote.
That. Yeah. But I also think, one of the things that I really take value from is the incredible generosity of the Pakistan Australia community. I mean, I don't know a community that organises so many fundraisers, whether it's to provide like critical cancer care. There are literally cancer treatments and hospitals that are in Pakistan who only survive because of the generosity of the global Pakistan diaspora. And when I go to those events and I'm invited to those events and I can take part in those events, it actually makes me more minded to get in and support the Pakistan Australia community, because you just see how generous they are. I see other fundraising events that are critical for getting girls education in Pakistan, and schools that are only open and operating because of the generosity of the community here. Look, I think just showcasing the Pakistan Australia community is actually really another powerful political tool you have, and invite politicians from across the board to those community events, because they're genuinely inspiring, and I think they build friendship as well.
Yeah, thank you, Senator David, for answering my questions. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, I think we've only got about a minute to go, but I'll just, it's always been a pleasure to speak to. And if I do get cut off, or I'm going to say, David, love your work, big fan. When you entered into the politics the first time, what was your most, what's been your greatest memory?
Well, I mean, I suppose that's pretty hard to answer. I mean, I've been a councillor, I've been a state MP, and I've been a senator. But, the thing that it doesn't matter which level of government you're at, I find the human engagement is what is most rewarding for me. And being actually in this incredibly privileged position where you can take a a discussion in a community centre, an engagement over dinner, and you can take it back into Parliament and you can try and fix things, and you can, hopefully change the country for the better based upon what you're hearing out and about in the community. It's an incredible privilege, I've got to tell you. And it keeps me and my team engaged. I sometimes say to people, I tolerate going into the Senate. Like, I have to go into that place. I have to go into Parliament to do my job. But but I love being out talking with the community and getting ideas and getting the energy that I have from the community. And it genuinely is a privilege. And my work with the Pakistan Australia community is a big part of that.
Sure. Last question. I've just had one online. What are the options as the Pakistani community here in Australia to help the people of Pakistan? That's a question for you from someone online.
Well, I think one of the things that, it's Shafqat Ali, and I've seen, his work doing fundraising and doing that out in the community. And I just want to give that credit. I actually think that's one of the most important things we can do. We can share some of our privilege through fundraising and community activities. We can share some of that privilege with the people of Pakistan. But I also think one thing that is really important is expect more from your politicians. Just expect them to, when they come into your community and talk with you, to be honest, to when they make commitments, to live up to those commitments. And, in the earlier discussion, talking about how there are promises made in an election campaign and they're not made good when people are elected. Well, we'll hold people to account and expect more from your politicians, because the more you expect, the higher the bar the community sets. I actually think that raises the level of politics. So, if I ever make a commitment in one of these, engagements, and then I don't live up to it, I expect you to hold me to account. But I sure as hell expect you to hold other politicians to account as well.
Yeah, sure. Accountability. Make the most of your politics. Expect more.
Yeah. It's amazing how much, your expectations actually fuel the outcomes. And when they don't live up to your expectations, let them know and hold them to account.
When you say expectations, I'm Muslim. I never celebrated Christmas, but I do feel like it's Christmas election time. There's so many promises and so many great things going to happen. And when Christmas is over, you didn't get the bike, you got something else, and turned out there was no batteries included.
I feel like that too. Yeah, you open the box and, oh my God, I need 4 AAAs. This thing isn't going to work. 3 years later, maybe you might get them. But I reckon this is a really interesting time, actually, because most of the polls are saying that neither of the major parties are going to have a majority in the lower house. I mean, they already don't have a majority in the Senate. We're already in that balanced power. But having that also in the lower house is going to make politics more interesting than ever. And I have a firm belief that it's going to be much, much better for the general public, because the usual players won't be able to monopolise it all. And they're going to be throughout the electoral cycle, not just in the Christmas period leading up to an election. They're going to be absolutely desperately keen to get community support. And, wouldn't that be nice if instead of just having to listen to the community in a few short months leading up to the election, if they were forced to do that throughout the political cycle? And a minority parliament is the way we can make that happen. And, I'm hopeful that federal politics will get better.
Sure. Last one, Chef, let's put another one up there. Can we have another opportunity to interact more and more engagement with the community?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's nice doing this online, but, if we can create a space where we can happen perhaps online and in person a bit, and have some more of that sort of real-time engagement, subject to my diary, I'm super happy to make that happen. As I think I tried to say, this is my favourite part of politics, talking with people, getting ideas and then taking them into the parliament.
Always been a champion of great cause that I've seen you in many charities and fundraisers, and it's really good you join us, because in some of those that I've been a part of, it's a highlight you being there. It's actually, you kind of become a draw card, and traditionally politicians haven't been a draw card. They've been more a sort of token.
Well, you see, I try and do short speeches. That's I think a really nice thing for politicians.
Yeah.
I try and make it short and meaningful, but people love short. So, you know, I like being there, but not dominating the events that I go to. If politicians realize how much communities love short speeches, everyone would do it.
Sure. I think sort of that winds everything up. Thank you again, David. It's always a pleasure having you and talking to you. You're one of the people we all collectively look up to, and we're looking for greater things in the future. To everyone listening out there, thank you. Good day. Jazakallah khair. Allah Hafiz.
Yeah, thanks so much.